So a lot of my colleagues would be like, "Oh, so you're planning on leaving nursing?" I was like, "No, I'm planning on, or like my next step is likely to be not in direct patient care. I don't consider that to be not nursing. I still, in my role, I need to be a nurse. I'm still utilizing my nursing skills. I'm still utilizing my education, my experiences, especially within oncology, for my current role."
Welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside. I'm Audrey, your host, and a nurse who pivoted my path several years ago. After 8 years as a critical care nurse, I was ready for change. I craved higher pay and more flexibility, but was struggling to find a clear path forward. Fast forward through positions in recruiting, customer success, and marketing, and many lessons learned along the way. Today, I run Pivot Path, a company dedicated to empowering nurses to redefine their careers. This podcast is designed to help you navigate the journey from clinical bedside nursing to a fulfilling career that aligns with your passions and goals. Here, you'll discover inspiring stories from nurses who've gone beyond the bedside, successfully transitioning to non-clinical roles, or redefining their nursing career. Join us as we hear their stories and share actionable strategies to help you make your own leap. Whether you're a new listener curious about what lies beyond the bedside, or a returning audience member in need of some fresh motivation, this podcast is your go-to resource for exploring new opportunities that can transform your career. Let's get started. Today we're joined by Cameron Cook. Like many of us, Cameron reached a point where he thought, there's got to be more. How can I make an impact beyond the bedside? During the COVID pandemic, he took a leap and pursued his MBA, which opened his eyes to a world of opportunity for nurses outside of traditional bedside roles. Today, he's an oncology clinical educator in the pharma space with a focus on breast cancer education, and he's passionate about helping other nurses see just how transferable and valuable our skills truly are. In this conversation, we'll talk about Cameron's path from bedside to pharma, the real-life steps nurses can take to pivot into roles like clinical education or even sales, and how platforms like LinkedIn can be career-changing tools for nurses who are ready for more. Cameron, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Audrey. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I like to start every nurse's story kind of back at the beginning, your introduction to nursing. Can you take us back to when you first started nursing and what drew you to oncology?
Yeah, no, that's a great place to start. For me personally, I really didn't know that oncology was kind of where I would end up going down that path. Then oncology really kind of just fell into my lap. Coming out of nursing school, I was one of those nurses that was gung-ho set on critical care. I wanted to care for the sickest of the sick, work in the ICU setting, something like that. And then it happened to be that the hospital I was looking at the time did not have any openings in their ICU. So thankfully to the recruiter that he pointed me in the direction of oncology. He's like, have you ever heard of oncology? You know what an inpatient oncology looks like? And I'm very grateful for the sense that I did not know what an inpatient oncology unit was like before I stepped foot as part of my job, meaning that I didn't have any family or friends that had spent time in the hospital needing oncology care. So in that sense, I was very grateful. But also at the same time, I went in a little bit unsure of what it was going to be in full. So I say that I didn't really necessarily have something that fully drew me to oncology. Again, I really liked that opportunity to care for the sickest of the sick. And it wasn't until I really got onto the floor in an oncology unit at a large academic center that I really got to see what oncology nursing was like delivered at the bedside. And that's really where this kind of journey all blossomed from.
That's really interesting to hear you say that, it wasn't necessarily oncology that you were drawn to in the beginning. It was just kind of the door that opened. And I feel like I hear that a lot from the nurses that come on this podcast, whether it's the specialty that they started in or the first job they took away from the bedside. It was just kind of a door that opened for them and they took it and it ended up being just right for them. So tell me a little bit about how long you were working at the bedside and when it entered your mind, whether it was like from the start or a little bit further down the road, that you might want to look into doing something more or something different?
Mhm. Exactly. So I'm sure many other nurses are in the same boat, that when we come out of school, start working, whether it's in direct patient care, whatever form it may be, that a lot of times we have that kind of external pressure upon nurses to pursue grad school. So again, as I mentioned, at first I was like, oh, I'm going to go to the ICU. Maybe I'll become a CRNA. That was my first initial thought. And then when I ended up in oncology, then I was like, oh, maybe I'll become an acute care NP, nurse practitioner, and follow down that route. And it kind of, my exposure at the bedside, working directly with the advanced practice providers, the MPs that I worked so closely with, it just kind of came to me that wasn't what I wanted to do. So at that point, I was kind of at a junction of what would be next. I knew going into kind of bedside nursing, I wasn't planning on being at the bedside for 40 years. So it was kind of, in what ways could I apply my nursing skills, my education, and what different avenues were out there. And then, of course, when the pandemic hit, all of us thought we had all this time on our hands, and what better time than that to pursue grad school. And that's really where kind of that decision was made to go down that path, and which I know is a little bit more non-traditional.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you call that out, because I also had the same experience of, okay, you're a bedside nurse, and then I did travel nursing for a little while, and then you start to think about like what's next and how you continue to climb that ladder. And it is like, okay, you go back to school for CRNA, NP, healthcare admin, like those are the paths that are set out for us. And sometimes those just don't feel right for everyone.
Mhm.
And I think it's interesting that you chose to get your MBA. And I want to hear a little bit more about that decision, because I'm thinking about my own experience, and having only worked clinically, I don't know that I necessarily would have even thought of getting my MBA. I don't know that I would have clearly seen a path for myself like after that degree. So I'm curious how that all kind of panned out for you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And you're not the only person who has kind of expressed that sentiment around a nurse pursuing their MBA. And I will say, what I've been grateful to have in my career is a lot of fantastic mentors and nurses that have done it before me, ahead of me, that I've been able to really lean on and rely on. And they were really the ones that kind of pushed me down this route. Specifically, I'll name Rebecca Love is one of my closest mentors, and she was really the one that kind of told me that if she had to do her nursing career over again, she would decide to go back and get her MBA on top of her nursing degree. And she kind of expressed of how that can be really a true level set when it comes to nurses being able to be in those boardrooms, in those rooms where change is really being made. That was one of the biggest level setters. So that's really where that kind of motivation to pursuing my MBA came from. And in my mind, just personally, I felt like it was what opened the most doors for me. I could have pursued, even just more on the business side of healthcare, pursued my MHA, my Master's in Healthcare Administration. And in my mind, that would have pigeonholed me a little bit more just to healthcare administration, meaning maybe working in an academic setting in a health system and working your way up in that sense. Whereas I felt that was a little siloed. So again, to put myself in the best opportunity to open as many doors as possible, when I ultimately decided to take this jump away from the bedside, away from direct patient care.
Yeah, I think that that's such a smart decision. And you're right. Like the MBA does seem like more of a broad solution to your grad school choice. And going through that program, did that change kind of the way that you saw your nursing career and the opportunities ahead for you? Because like you mentioned, it gives you more of that perspective to be in those decision-making conversations and understand the business of healthcare. So how did that change your perception of your nursing career?
Yeah, I think the program I was in, obviously getting my MBA, really allowed me to kind of apply my skills and my education, my knowledge, what I consider at like the macro level at least more of a macro level than, say, the micro level of caring for 3 to 5 patients on a daily basis when you're working at the bedside. And again, that's not to speak down on, obviously, the care that's provided at the bedside. That's of the utmost importance. But I saw myself wanting to kind of apply my skills at a larger scale. I guess that's the best way to put it. The MBA was really able to put myself in those positions to be able to have that kind of macro level effect on healthcare delivery, again, how we care for patients. And that's really what the program helped to kind of reshift my mindset around how nurses' skills apply away from the bedside. That was something that always, like, not that I struggled with, but it was sometimes hard to identify. And I know nurses really do have a hard time identifying what those skills are. And once I was able to go through that program, and especially in this newer job of mine, been able to really see how those can come to fruition.
Absolutely. I think that that's a really common mental block that nurses experience when they start thinking about what they can do beyond a bedside career. I had the same mental block. You know, I didn't really understand how my Bachelor of Science in nursing and like my clinical experience hands-on with patients could serve me in a different setting. And really for me, the thing that opened my mind to it and my eyes to the opportunity was just talking with other people in other industries about what their job was, what they did day to day, because honestly, I really didn't understand what people did at their desks from 9 to 5, you know? So once I started to learn more about things, I would cue in. I'm like, you know, I could do that. Like, I can manage projects. I can prioritize, you know, like I can do all of these things that are wrapped up in these other people's roles. So I do think that exposure, whether it's just from networking conversations or school or whatever it may be, I think that exposure is really critical in kind of having that aha moment of feeling like your career is kind of narrow and pigeonholed to realizing, oh, my skills can actually take me all of these different places. And, you know, that is a misconception that I had, a pretty major misconception about like the transferability of my nursing education, career skills. Did you experience, like looking back in hindsight, did you have any misconceptions at first about working non-clinically or leaving the bedside?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say necessarily misconceptions of mine, but I will say there were misconceptions in general when I was taking the step away. I would frequently get asked the question like, oh, or like when I was going through grad school, I was getting my MBA, going through that program and still working at the bedside. So a lot of my colleagues would be like, oh, so you're planning on leaving nursing? I was like, no, I'm planning on, or like my next step is likely to be not in direct patient care. I don't consider that to be not nursing. I still, in my role, I need to be a nurse. I'm still utilizing my nursing skills. I'm still utilizing my education, my experiences, especially within oncology, for my current role. So in that sense, that's where I think that misconception, especially with the grad program, I decided to go with that path. I decided to go down. There were misconceptions there. But I will say, even in general, with my role as a clinical educator in pharma, I will say there were misconceptions of my own in the sense of I didn't know this role really existed until it happened to fall into my lap, perusing LinkedIn one day about almost 2 years ago. I'm sure along with a lot of other nurses, think that clinical educators are kind of synonymous with, say, clinical nurse specialists. You have them on each unit. They're responsible for, especially in the hospital, ensuring that their nurses feel that they're competent and confident in the care that they provide to the patients they see every day. So when I saw a posting for a clinical educator within the pharmaceutical industry, I would say a little skeptical, of course, but at the same time, I was like, might as well go for it. I mean, if you don't put your foot out there and kind of throw your hat in the ring, you might never know.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to dive a little bit deeper about that role that you're in now. Like, what does a clinical educator in the pharma industry do? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, so I will say, again, like I mentioned, I was unsure and unaware of what this role really did at first. So it was very eye-opening for me when I ended up taking this job and I've really enjoyed it ever since. So my main role and responsibility is to educate clinicians. So not really educating patients in my current role. I will say there are clinical educator roles out there within the pharma space that do educate patients as well. But the specific team that I work on focuses solely on the education of clinicians. So that being, it can be providers, APPs, nurses, pharmacists, pharm techs, medical assistants, really anybody in an oncology office, a cancer clinic that will touch a patient that is on one of our breast cancer medicines. So that's really my job, is to ensure that those clinicians themselves feel confident. They understand the information, they understand how to manage, say, side effects that a patient may experience while on our specific breast cancer medicines. And when you ask about the day-to-day, I will say that highly varies. And I know that can be intimidating to some people. And it was a little, I guess, intimidating to me at first, because especially coming directly from the bedside, direct patient care, that I was used to structure. I was used to even just having 10 other nurses I was working side by side with on a 36-bed unit. We had a manager, like everybody else was circulating. So then going from that and having a lot of structure, even though obviously when you're in the hospital, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of adaptability that's needed from nurses. But at the same time, a lot of it is structured. You'll come in at the same time every day. You'll end up leaving after your 12 and a half, 13-hour shift. So coming into now working primarily either from home, my role is considered to be a field role. So I cover geography. My geography being, I describe it as Eastern Pennsylvania, from like Lancaster up to Scranton down to Philadelphia, and then about 95% of New Jersey. So I live kind of smack dab in the middle of that territory, so I can easily drive to all the accounts that I cover. So again, my day-to-day can look very different. One day I could be providing lunch to an office and the staff in there and providing education. I'll bring in food. People come in groups, and then I provide them education about our breast cancer medicine. Or maybe the next day I don't have anything scheduled. So I decide to hop in the car and go drive to some of my accounts that I haven't seen in a while, and want to just stop in, say hi, see how things are going, if there are any issues with the patients they may have on their medicines. And then another day I might work primarily from home and not really leave my apartment and do a lot of administrative stuff. Or maybe I'll make a few phone calls and try to schedule appointments for the near future. So in that sense, our day-to-day in this role is very flexible, and I do really enjoy that aspect.
I'm actually glad to have you talk some about a field-based position, because I feel like, people become kind of hyper-focused on remote work. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's important to remember, that field work is out there, and it doesn't always mean, it can look differently depending on the role and where you're working, but it doesn't mean that you're traveling or out and about every single day. And that variability, especially for people who enjoy being social and like that person-to-person interaction, can be really nice. Some people who work from home all the time say, not for me. I miss having coworkers. I miss talking to people. I miss that human interaction. So I'm glad that you touched on that, because because sometimes I send out field-based roles in my newsletter. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I wonder if nurses really understand what a field-based role is, because obviously that doesn't necessarily exist in nursing. So I'm glad that you shed some light on that. And what was your transition from bedside to pharma life? What did that look like? Was it as easy as finding a job on LinkedIn and submitting an application? What steps were you doing to pursue this job?
Yeah, so I will say that I would say the process was multifaceted. In one sense, I will say I was very fortunate. It partially was as easy as you kind of just described it, as applying to a job on LinkedIn and submitting an application that way. And this is kind of an outlier. This is mostly an outlier. Within 2.5, 3 weeks, had a couple interviews and an offer and accepted, which is pretty fast, I will say, for industry in general, or the pharmaceutical industry. That is pretty quick turnaround. I think it was the nature of the company I work for, but On the other hand, I will say that there was a lot of work done in the months leading up, in the years leading up, in the sense that this wasn't necessarily, I kind of make it seem like it was a spur of the moment decision to take this jump. But at the same time, I had gone through my MBA program for 2 years. During that time, I was also kind of fishing around for what opportunities I would pursue after I finished my program. I made this jump. It was 9 months after I finished my program. So like I had a decent amount of kind of a runway time to make this jump. I was having conversations with plenty of other people that were in a lot of different other spaces, and not necessarily the pharma space, but kind of figuring out what other roles that I didn't necessarily want to pursue. Because like, I mean, pursuing my MBA really did and can open up many doors. I could have gone into, say, if I wanted to become, I don't know, a case reviewer and work in insurance, something like that. I can go work in healthcare technology space. I'd be a little bit better equipped just with that basic business knowledge as well. And then I just ultimately ended up falling upon the pharma industry. When I was having conversations with plenty of other people in different industries, figuring out, and I feel it's just as important to figure out what you don't want in your next role as much as you do. So figuring that out was months in the works.
Yeah, I think that laying that foundation of understanding and just spending time learning and absorbing is really crucial for setting yourself down a successful path. Beyond having your MBA, do you feel like there were any experiences or skills that you brought to the table that helped you to stand out in your interviews or applications?
Yeah, I will say in my current role, I don't need my MBA. I like to tell myself that it certainly helped because I dedicated a good amount of my time and resources to pursuing my program. But at the same time, in my role as a clinical educator, I don't need my MBA. At the same time, I will say the oncology bedside experience was required. And that's something that, whether it was directly on the inpatient side, it can be outpatient as well, but just that direct patient care within the oncology space was really the only requirement for this role. I mean, obviously, being willing to at least travel a bit. For my territory, it's majority by car. There's no real reason for me to need to fly up to North Jersey, which is a 2.5-hour drive. Whereas I do have some colleagues that like on our team that cover the Midwest, and they might cover 3-4 different states. So they might be hopping on a plane every other week to go fly to another state, stay a couple days in a hotel, hit and visit all the accounts that they have in that state, and then come back home. So just obviously the willingness to be on the road a little bit, and really that oncology experience was really the only requirements for this role.
Yeah, it's great to find a role that hits your experience right on the head. So, if a nurse is listening to this and they're interested in the pharma industry, they're kind of unsure of where to start learning, where to start searching, what advice would you give them as far as resources, conversations to have, roles to look for, things like that?
Yeah, I'll focus more on the, like you said, conversations and roles to look out for. The conversations to have is to connect with people, whether it's like me in a clinical educator role within pharma, finding other nurses who have made that transition, who might be, quote, ahead of you in your career. Just having those conversations and being open and being willing to put yourself out there, I think is very important, and I think can really just get the ball rolling. And I really highly emphasize to nurses that I talk to have these conversations before you might be feeling burnt out. Or maybe it's just the first inkling of feeling burnt out, because unfortunately, a lot of us know that burnout can come on very fast. And it's not something, and a lot of times this kind of transition is not something that can happen in a week or two. Like I talked about, it was months of me preparing, and yeah, that can feel daunting, but at the same time, if you're willing to step out of your comfort zone a little bit, have these kind of conversations with people that might be in roles that you're interested in pursuing, I think that can be highly valuable and provide you a really good return on your investment of time. Secondly, I will say the kind of roles to look out for. So again, my role as an oncology clinical educator within the pharma space, there are within like the industry or life sciences industry in general, there's also the other side, which is more medical devices. a lot of times that can be a very easy transition for nurses into the medical device side, and more of a clinical specialist role is what you'll see. A lot of times it won't even be necessarily oncology focused. It'll be those that might have ICU experience, cardiac experience, maybe cardiac cath lab. Really, these companies are looking for clinicians that have used their products before to be able to now educate the next wave of clinicians that will be using their products. So who better to do that than nurses who are working, again, tirelessly at the bedside? And now this provides an opportunity for you to kind of pass it along, all the kind of education and training you've received when you're at the bedside, being able to now kind of specialize within a certain medical device area can be highly, highly rewarding.
Yeah, and a tip in there for nurses on the unit to kind of keep an eye out for what brands are behind the medications they're giving, the equipment that they're using. Those are great places to just kind of start looking and start researching. And you and I both like LinkedIn as a career tool. I first started using LinkedIn when I was working with a career coach and was encouraged to start having just informational interviews, just networking, talking to people, learning about their job, absorbing the information, the language they use, all of those things. And at first I thought it was crazy to reach out to someone on the internet and ask if they'd have a virtual call with me, before I realized that's just kind of the norm. That's what people do. That is professional networking. But how have you used LinkedIn, and how would you recommend nurses use it to start to explore and network for non-clinical roles?
I will say I like to treat LinkedIn as essentially a running resume. And that's what I like to tell people, that it's not even just you posting your job updates and telling people, oh, you joined a new count, like a committee in your hospital on your floor, which is great. Obviously, you want to update people of the work that you're doing, but at the same time, it also keeps track of, oh, what posts you're interacting with, what comments are you leaving, who are you interacting with, obviously who you're connected with. And I think above all else, LinkedIn is a great place to manage your network and kind of keep tabs on your network. It is truly a social networking platform. It's just more focused on the professional side or the career development side. So in that sense, you only get so much out of it of what you put into it. So that's what I really highly advise nurses to do. And I fully recognize that LinkedIn is not really tailored for healthcare professionals, nurses specifically. But at the same time, as I talked about before, of just putting yourself out there. And I like the use of the phrase or the word informational interviews, that a lot of these conversations that I have, that I never really thought of them like that. And that's a great way to put it, that I see it as just an opportunity to connect with someone. And what you'll find, and what I've found, is that people love talking about themselves. Yes. So giving people the platform like this to be able to speak about their experiences, people will really open up to you. And I think that's a wonderful opportunity for you to really develop these relationships with people that, again, like I talked about, might be more, quote, ahead of you in your career or in a role that you desire down the line. And I like to kind of use this phrase, like people often talk about, oh, it's really about who you know, like who's in your network, who you know. And I agree that that's a strong indicator of like network success or like your relationships that you build. But at the same time, what I think is just as important, if not more important, is who knows you. So just let that sink in for a second. So who knows your career goals, your aspirations, what you want to pursue next? Because if you keep that all to yourself, no one's going to be able to help you. If you're not having these kind of conversations with other people that you have shared interest with, again, it might be someone who's in a role that you're interested in, and you give them the opportunity to tell you about themselves. And at the same time, you have now had the opportunity to really tell them about your career aspirations. And look at that. Maybe a month down the line, they see an opening for a role that's similar to theirs, what you're interested in. And because you have that conversation, you were top of mind for them. And these kind of conversations can really build and strengthen one's network. And again, nothing may come of these conversations that you have, but at the least you had an enjoyable conversation, and who knows, maybe 6 months down the line, something may change. It might not be just one conversation. I like to think of kind of like relationship building. It is like dating. You're going to have to wine and dine some people. You're not going to end up changing your whole career because you meet with someone one time. I mean, that might be the off chance, but it might take 2 or 3 conversations to get to really know someone that you then become truly front of mind for them when, say, you're looking for your next opportunity in your career.
I absolutely love the perspective of who knows you and what you're doing and what you want and what you've accomplished. And when you think about LinkedIn, like, I love that you called out the engagement piece, beyond just the networking and like talking to people, but engaging with posts, making comments on things that you're interested in, and following people and companies that you're interested in. That all, and also, of course, like making your own posts and content about, maybe your accomplishments or the new positions or whatever. All of that does ultimately feed back into the awareness of who Audrey is or who Cameron is, right? So like people in your network, they see you in the comments, they see you interacting, they start to see what your interests are beyond just the one-on-one conversations, which are such a huge lever, as you mentioned. So I think that's such a great call out. And the same career coach I had who encouraged me to have informational interviews said, Audrey, if you network well, you will reach a point in your career where you don't look for jobs come to you. And I, at the time, thought, I don't know about that. That seems not quite right. But it is true. If you put out into the world, like, this is what I like to work on. This is what I don't like to work on. This is what I've done before. This is what I'm looking for next. These are my aspirations. People will think of you. And yeah, if their company has something come available, you want to be right there top of mind. Like, you know what? Cameron would be great for this position. Let me reach out to him and see if he's looking right now. So yeah, super, super important to call out. I think that is just such a major piece of advice. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. What I'll add on to that is the sense that this is, again, not a happens in 1 week kind of thing. And you kind of want to approach, especially when it comes to whether it's LinkedIn or just professional networking in general, is you want to really build it before you need it, meaning build your network of individuals, especially like I was talking about, who know you and know what you want to do next before you really need to make that transition. The last thing you want is to be in a space where you really need to find a new job. Maybe that something happened with your previous employer, where you need to find a new job in the next 2 weeks, and then end up in a situation that you're not enjoying the next step in your career. So again, putting that effort in months and years in advance, and I know it sounds daunting, but a lot of it's not a lot of time dedicated to it. It just takes, again, stepping a little bit out of your comfort zone, having these conversations here and there, not being hesitant to kind of put yourself out there, and you'll eventually bear the fruit down the line.
Yeah, I think normalizing it in your mind, like realizing that professionals everywhere do this. They set up these kinds of calls and conversations. It's not something that we're super accustomed to in just like clinical nursing, but recognizing that this is just kind of part of the norm for everybody else, I think is helpful in flipping that switch to feel a little bit more comfortable putting yourself out there.
Exactly.
And, I know that it's funny that you are actually already mentioned, you have your MBA. It's not necessarily required for this job, but what is your opinion on nurses needing advanced degrees to pivot into industry, or whether it more just comes down to looking for the right type of role that kind of fits where you're at?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say there are a handful of really strong opportunities for nurses within the pharma industry, especially, to pivot without an advanced degree. And that would be within clinical research. Clinical research nurses are needed really, again, as we think about pharmaceuticals, you talk about drug development, clinical trials, before you even get to the point of commercialization, meaning marketing and sales of the drug, obviously the medication has to undergo rigorous clinical trials. And oftentimes those are nurses that are helping to run those clinical trials, whether at really a local level or even a regional level. Oftentimes nurses are really valued in those kind of spaces. And that's something that you really don't need a master's degree to make that pivot into. And what I like to say is that, and this isn't always the case, but a lot of times when you do break into industry, into pharma, the opportunities kind of start flowing from there to move up, move around, especially to kind of really just increase the types of experiences you have. I like to think, especially if you come into like in a more entry level role, at that point in your career, I highly emphasize taking on multiple different kinds of roles that really just amass different skills and exposures. Maybe it's different disease areas that you, especially in the clinical trial space, you're managing trials in multiple different disease areas, multiple different patient populations. So in that sense, I will say, again, that's a great opportunity for nurses to break into pharma without needing a graduate degree or an MBA specifically. I will say if nurses are interested in pursuing, say, if you jump to truly the business side and wanted to go into, say, like marketing, management, something like that, if you wanted to manage a brand, meaning like a specific drug, that might be where, coming from the clinician side, it would be, I'm not going to say required, but it would be very highly valuable to have your MBA to make that jump. But just breaking into pharma, I think there is a nice path for nurses to jump, especially into clinical research, or again, into my similar role as a clinical educator.
Yes, and I'm glad that you mentioned kind of the fluidity of growth and opportunities that can come with these types of roles, because in nursing, it sometimes feels like our path is so straight and narrow, and the opportunities for growth are only so incremental. And my experience working in health tech has been that, I encourage people, take that entry level job. If you can get that job, get your foot in the door, get experience, start building a new skill set. And I think that you'll be surprised once you're in there at the opportunities available to you. Whether that is a upward promotion, a lateral move to try, whether, let's say you go in sales and you want to try customer success or operations. Once your foot is in the door, it's so much easier to make these moves and gain the new experience and earn the promotion. A type of growth that I feel like we're not super used to experiencing in clinical bedside nursing. So I think that that's just an important call out when nurses are looking, because I think sometimes it can be a little discouraging to think, oh, I have to start over in this entry level position. Whereas really it's like, yeah, it's an entry level position maybe, but you don't have to be in that entry level position for long, right? Like you can give it 6 months to a year, earn those skills, do new things and see where that takes you. And I think that many people are surprised with the opportunities that are actually available to them.
Yeah. And I think even just adding on that, I think, because obviously a lot of people see money is a big factor. Again, sometimes there might be a pay difference taking a more entry-level role, but I like to emphasize, like you said, it can be maybe it's 6 months to a year that you stay in this role, but also understanding the value of, do I have more time freedom? Do I have better work-life balance? Maybe I am working fully remote and that's what I truly enjoy, and you realize, now I do have time to actually go grocery shopping at the end of the workday, or do I have time to go to the gym before I start work, compared to what it was like when I was working, say 12-hour, 13-hour shifts in the hospital. So that's also another factor to consider that I know some people don't always at least verbalize when they're making these kinds of decisions.
Absolutely. That's super important. And, so there's a value definitely to be added on to the work-life balance that you might find. But then not to mention the monetary value that you can find when you are making these like additional moves once you're already like have your foot in the door. So yeah, I think that's great to call out. Well, Cameron, is there any last piece of advice or encouragement that you might offer to a nurse who's kind of feeling burned out at the bedside, unsure if they could thrive somewhere else, or just kind of overall feeling stuck?
Yeah, I mean, I will say I was in those exact same shoes and had those exact same feelings just a couple of years ago before making this transition. So I will say I hear you and I feel you. And at the same time, I think just the piece of advice that I've been kind of echoing in multiple different ways during this conversation is being open to putting yourself out there and just opening your eyes to the opportunities that might not be most apparent to you right in front of you. And I will say, through those kinds of conversations, it might not be the result is, oh, I want to jump into pharma, I want to be an educator, I want to move into sales, or, oh, I want to jump into health tech and I want to go down that route. You may come to the realization that you're exactly where you want to be for the next handful of years, and that you might have been just thinking about things differently before you had these conversations. So just having these conversations kind of can open your eyes in multiple different ways. And I do highly encourage people to reach out. I will be more than happy to talk with people through this on a one-to-one basis. And if anybody would love to hear my story in more depth, I'd be more than happy to offer that.
If you'd like to connect with Cameron after today's show, you can find his LinkedIn in the show notes below. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. And if you were inspired by today's conversation, I hope you'll share this episode with someone who'd love it just as much as you did. If you're ready to pivot your path, sign up for my free newsletter at mypivotpath.com. Get non-bedside jobs delivered to your inbox every week. And if you have questions or just want to say hi, feel free to email me at audrey@mypivotpath.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time.